The other thing that I learned is we used to use what was called tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. So a lot of times we would show up on scene having no idea why we were there. Why did this person, grab a gun and barricade themselves? Why did they take hostages? We had no idea. So the empathy part was help me to understand where you're coming from. And the important word there is understand, because we weren't going to, if I was negotiating with somebody that had just murdered three people, I wasn't going to agree that what they did was right. But just by understanding someone, understanding built trust.
Terry, thank you so much for joining us today. I am very excited to hear your story. You've been through quite a bit. And as usual, I'm not going to share what it is you did. I prefer they hear it directly from you. So if you can just tell us a little bit about what happened previously to what brought you here today.
Sure. So first of all, Natasha, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. I give you a sort of a snippet of my life. Grew up on the south side of Chicago, one of the larger cities here in the United States. I'm the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of a fast food company in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After my marketing stint, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, I made a major pivot in my life, became a police officer. Part of what I did during my law enforcement career, was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. But for the last 12 plus years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma that has seen my foot amputated in 2018, my leg amputated in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and I still have tumors in my lungs. So it's hard for me to get out and travel, but being able to be on podcasts and I've had the opportunity to be on podcasts all over the world, it gives me an opportunity to meet really interesting people and just try to get my message out in that form.
Wow. That's a lot. So can we unpack that a little bit before we carry on?
Sure.
So SWAT Hostage Negotiator, how did you end up doing that?
So I've always wanted to be the best in my life. And usually SWAT teams on police departments or sheriff's departments, those are usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. So when there was an opening as a negotiator, I put in for it. But I was in my 40s and there was a physical fitness component. You had to run 1.5 miles, do so many push-ups and sit-ups. You had to meet with the psychologist. You had to take psychological exams, meet with the command staff, and then eventually meet with the team. And it was an all or nothing with the team. If one person said, hey, I've worked with Terry before, he's difficult to work with, I don't think he should be on the team, then you didn't get on. And I was fortunate enough to have everybody give me the thumbs up on the team. And that started a 4.5-year kind of odyssey through how we communicate with each other, dealing with people more than likely having the worst day of their life. If you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, probably not having a good day and things like that. So I learned a lot about communication during that time as a negotiator.
Yeah, I'm sure, because that kind of communication applies in all areas of life, not just hostage. I think that would stand you in good stead when it comes to just negotiating on any level.
It does. And we all negotiate every day. We're all, selling, so to speak, either ourselves or our ideas and things like that every day. So how do you do that so that you can be as effective as possible with the understanding of how you're trying to communicate a message. I'll give you a quick formula that I was given when I started. The formula was 738-55, and it's how we communicate a message to each other. 7% are the words that we use. And think how many times you've said something and be like, oh, I wish I would have said something different, or I wish I would have said it in a different way. That's only 7% of how the message gets communicated. 38% is the tone of voice that you use with that message. Are you excited? Are you mad? Are you kind of depressed? How is that voice being used to communicate the message? And then 55%, so more than half of how we communicate a message, is our body language and our facial expressions. So understanding that as negotiators, we were not, if somebody was barricaded in a room with hostages and I had a gun in that, I was not in the room with them. I was a lot of times down the street, talking on the phone. So I didn't have the luxury of, saying, hey, Natasha, XYZ, and seeing you kind of roll your eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe he said that to me. We didn't have that luxury. So we had to figure things out, certainly based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't come with a manual because you don't know how they're going to respond. So what did you learn from that experience for yourself?
I mean, I learned a lot. Like, I'm not somebody that, so one of the things we would do was we would ask how and what questions. We would stay away from why questions because why questions sound accusatory. Well, Natasha, why did you wear that today? Oh, wait a minute. Does he not like what I'm wearing? Or Natasha, why is your hair like, oh, wait a minute. Does he not like my hair today? So I can get to the same answer saying, well, Natasha, what made you decide to wear that shirt today? That's a little bit of a softer question as opposed to why did you do that? The other thing that I learned is we used to use what was called tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. So a lot of times we would show up on scene having no idea why we were there. Why did this person, grab a gun and barricade themselves? Why did they take hostages? We had no idea. So the empathy part was help me to understand where you're coming from. And the important word there is understand, because we weren't going to, if I was negotiating with somebody that had just murdered 3 people, I wasn't going to agree that what they did was right. But just by understanding someone, understanding built trust, and trust, hopefully over time, got me to a point where I could try to get that person out safely.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds so familiar with what we learn as coaching as well, is asking the what and the how questions.
Yeah.
So interesting that you applied it in that field as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I've done podcasts where people will say, I learned that in sales training. So, it does have application over different career fields for a lot of different people.
Yeah, there's actually a book I read by I can't remember the name of the book offhand now, but it was about hostage negotiation. And I think it's one of the top 10 books in communicating effectively on how to negotiate with people. And that was also written by someone who'd been in the field for I don't know how many years, but very interesting.
Was it Never Split the Difference?
Yes, that one. That's the one. Yes.
Chris Voss. Yeah, he was on the federal level. He was on the national level. Our local law enforcement was able to train with those people, but they were on a whole different. He was a guy that was brought in if you were a missionary in the Philippines and some guerrilla group kidnapped you and they wanted a ransom. He would go in and negotiate for those people. I wasn't doing anything nearly as good as that. So.
Well, everyone's doing what they're doing their bit, and you can't be all things to everyone.
You're right.
So how did that change you? Because I'm sure there must have been times that things just didn't go your way. And things just go south rapidly, and then it's out of your control. What do you do in that case? Do you go home and berate yourself?
I didn't. And, about 90% of the time we were successful getting the person out, getting the hostages out. But about 10% of the time, for example, I mentioned if we were negotiating with a homicide suspect, he knew that he was caught. He knew he wasn't going anywhere. We had the building surrounded. We're just trying to get him out safely. but he also knew that he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And so those people had a decision. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in prison. I'm going to end my life here. And while any loss of life is always tragic, and I don't mean to sound callous about this, but I never lost any sleep over that. And the reason I didn't was because, one, I worked with really good people. Two, I had really great training. And three, I always knew I did everything I could to get that person out safely. At the end of the day, it was their actions, their determination on how this was going to end. Were they going to come out? Were we going to have to send a tactical team in to get them? Or were they going to end their own life? And like I said, 90% of the time, things worked out great. But 10% of the time, people just said, you know what? I know what my future is. I don't like that future. I'm not going to be part of that. And I'm just going to end it right here. So it was really their decision on how this was going to end.
Yeah. I suppose that's a form of them maintaining control over what happens in their life.
Exactly. Yeah. I have control. I can decide how this is going to end. And it's like, absolutely, you can. And if you want to shoot yourself, that's fine. I hope you don't. But, because there's always somebody, and we used to try to do that. There's somebody out there that loves you. It might be a cousin. It might be a mother. It might be you have a child somewhere. Somebody out there loves you. There's, what do you have to look forward to? Even though you may be incarcerated for the rest of your life, can you communicate with those persons? Can you write them letters and things like that? And, like I said, most of the time we get them out safely, but even trying to appeal to something that you love more than yourself, they're like, no, I'm not going to be behind bars in a cell for the rest of my life. So your decision.
Wow. Is there a common theme among the people that are hostage takers? Is it money? Is it power? Is it drugs? What is it?
Yes.
One of them.
I mean, for the people that, for the freedom fighters, the guerrillas and stuff like that in different countries that take hostages, it's almost always about money. They don't really care about the hostages. It's, can I get money and what can I do? Or something else. Or, can I get some of my group out of prison or something like that? For me, it was usually alcohol or drug related, or some kind of a dispute, argument with another person that was important in their life. And, that was always kind of, like I said, a lot of times we would get there and have no idea why we were there. And you might be the primary. So you're the person talking to the person, but there's also another negotiator sitting right next to you, listening to everything that's going on and passing you notes. And you might get a note from your secondary that says, don't talk about his mother, because we have 4 or 5 other negotiators kind of working the crowd, getting intelligence. Why are we here? What happened? And they found out that he had a huge fight with his mother. He grabbed a gun and he barricaded himself in his bedroom. That things like that happened all the time. And one of the things we never did with people is we never lied to them. So sometimes people would say to us, I'll come out, but you have to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say, I'm sorry, when you do come out, you are going to go to jail. And then we would try to deflect the conversation to something more pleasing, more palatable. And the reason we didn't lie to people is because there was a very good chance. And this happened, a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we would be right back negotiating with these people. Because as I said, you'd get a note that said, don't talk about his mother. He had a huge fight, huge blow up with his mother. Well, 2 years later, his mother's still alive. His mother's still pushing his buttons, and they have another big blow up, and he grabs a gun and barricades himself. And if he ever felt, hey, Terry, you lied to me the last time, I have no credibility. There's no way he's going to trust me, and we're going to have to bring another negotiator in to try to get him out safely.
Wow. So is it premeditated, or is it spur of the moment thing normally? Sounds like it's an emotional.
Yeah, emotions are.
Reaction.
Yeah, emotions are. We used to explain to people how we did this when we were young. Not that we're old now, but when we were kids, we would go to the park and play on the teeter-totter or the seesaw at the park. And what we would describe how we did is when we started negotiating with people, their emotional brain was way up in the air and their rational brain was down on the ground. And by using empathy, by asking how and what questions, by kind of mirroring what they were saying back to them, we were hoping to get that teeter-totter or seesaw to equilibrium. And then again, over more time, more questions, burning off a lot of that emotional energy, you would hope to get to the point where their rational brain was way up in the air and their emotional brain was down on the ground. Now, dealing with their emotional brain, that's when we start talking about solutions, putting the gun down, letting the hostages go, coming out, and things like that. When they're yelling and screaming, and we're not talking about solutions, we're not talking about coming out, we're just trying to get them to burn off that energy, because we all know we make better decisions for ourselves using our rational brain as opposed to our emotional brain.
Yeah. And how long does it normally take to calm the brain down?
Hours.
Hours. Really?
And the reason negotiating was so exhausting, for lack of a better word, is you had to get down in the weeds with these people. If they're yelling and screaming and ranting and raving about their mom, for example, I keep using the mom scenario, then you can't say to them, oh, you seem like you're a little upset with your mother. No, they are pissed as all get out with their mother. And if you don't go there with them, if you don't get it down in the weeds, if you say something like, oh, they're just a little upset, you've totally missed what they're trying to tell you. And if you missed it, you're not gaining trust with this individual. So you got to get down in the weeds with them. You've got to really kind of, tense up and feel that emotion with them so that they, oh yeah, Terry gets me. He understands, what I'm going through. He understands what a pain in the neck my mother is and things like that. Oh, okay. Now we're building trust. And as I said, trust leads me to a point where I can hopefully get them out safely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be great even in just normal domestic arguments. If somebody would just listen, hear you out, feel you out, things would go so much better.
Yeah, help me to understand where you're coming from. Again, not agree. You and I can have a conversation and not agree on something, but somehow we've gotten off the rails where if we don't agree, if you don't agree with everything I say, then somehow you become a bad person. It's like, when did that happen? Just because we don't agree on something doesn't mean we can't have a relationship. We can't work together. We can't be friends and things like that. Somehow we've gotten to that point where it's all or nothing. And nothing in life is all or nothing. There's always compromise. There's always trying to work together to come to some kind of common ground. And we just don't seem to do that anymore. We're just screaming at each other. And when you're screaming at me and I'm screaming at you, neither one of us can hear or understand what the other person's saying.
No, you don't. I think that's something people should be taught even in school already.
Yeah. Well, I think kids in a lot of ways, especially small kids, they figure that out because they take the emotion out of it. It's like, I want that toy. No, I want that toy. Well, okay, you can have it now, but I want it in 5 minutes. Okay. Well, that's a compromise. That's we work something out. It's not personal. I'm not mad at you because, of the color of your skin or your religious affiliation or your sexual prep. No, we're just trying to negotiate on a truck that we want to play with in the sand. That's okay. Kids figure that out. It's when we grow up and become adults where we get to be kind of idiots.
So what happens then? How does that change?
I think we get around people that have those attitudes. I've always said, and I'm not the first person to say this, we're a product of the 5 people we hang around with the most. You want to hang around with people that care about you, that love you, that want what's best for you, not people where, it's all about them and there's a lot of drama and things going on in their life. If you hang around with good people, you'll be a better person. If you hang around with negative people that are always down, where there's always an issue, you'll end up being that kind of person too. So I think it depends on who you start to hang around with as you grow up, and are those people good for you? And if they're not, and I always say this, especially when it comes to work, but I think it applies to a lot of other areas of our lives. It's more important who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do.
I have a quick request. If you're enjoying this content, then please subscribe. It helps our channel to grow, which will bring more people with inspirational stories just like this one, which in turn will reach more people like you. Thank you. Now let's get back to the interview.
Find people that care about you. Find people that are willing to invest in you. Find people that want to see you succeed, and hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountains together. You'll both win in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that was actually going to be my next question, because if you're negotiating with people that are emotionally so on edge all the time, surely that would impact on your life as well. Even though you've got a great team, you're dealing with people that are crazed on the other side. Yeah, and I suppose long term it wouldn't have great benefit either.
No, it doesn't. I unfortunately know, I can think of 3 people right now that committed suicide that were police officers that I worked with, that, I just can't deal with this anymore. I can't handle this. I can't, all the things that we see. No, and I'm going to end my life. And I would have never guessed that those people would have done it. They were good people. They were nice people. They were people I liked hanging around with. And then one day they're just not here. Somebody finds them in a parking lot after what we used to call eat your gun, and that's, that's horrible. Because there's always people that love you. There's always people that care about you. But if you can't reach out to them, if you reach that breaking point, they would just end their life. And how tragic was that?
Yeah, and you never really know the reason, because to me, I see a lot of people that are first responders and that are people that really want to help, but they themselves don't get the support. So, and they don't know how to ask. So they're always there for others, but when they're in a dark hole, they don't know how to receive.
Yeah.
So,
and that's kind of a macho thing, especially if you're a guy, you don't ask for help. And when I was a police officer, it was just starting to get to the point where, there were employee assistance programs, and, we had a psychologist that you could go talk to, kind of off the record. He or she was not going to tell the department that you were having a hard time, unless you were a danger to yourself or to somebody else. Then they had to do it. But other than that, give me somebody to talk to. Just let me talk this out. I had that with my wife. Like I said, I didn't have to get into the nitty gritty, but I could at least get enough off my chest where, okay, that's done. We're good with that. I'm good with that. And I can move on to whatever's next.
yeah. So then you left that and you started teaching basketball to girls at a high school. That's a big shift. How did that happen?
That was probably one of the hardest jobs ever.
That was harder. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I loved it, but it was, see, I have no sisters. So, I grew up with 2 brothers. And so when my wife and I, when she was pregnant, we went to the OBGYN, and the doctor's like, do you want to know the sex of the baby? And we were like, sure. And he said, well, you should buy pink. And I was like, oh, no. You need to keep it in there till it's done. I have no idea how to raise a girl. But today our daughter's 28 years old, and she and I have a fantastic relationship. So you figure it out, something new.
So, but the mindset, was that just because you knew basketball and it was something less pressurized, that you thought it's some better value you could add in a different way?
Yeah, I ended up coaching in a school that really was terrible in girls basketball. They didn't understand. They didn't even know what they didn't know. And I was like, maybe I can help. Maybe I can try to teach them what sports taught me, of how to learn how to win, how to learn how to lose, how to be a better teammate, how to be coachable, how to deal with people you don't necessarily agree with. All those things I think are what, and more, what team sports can teach you. And these kids, it was just like they throw the ball out and, okay, now we'll go play a game and get beat by 40 points. And it's like, do you like getting killed like this? You're not even competing with these other teams. You're getting massacred with these teams. And I will never forget, give you a story. And growing up, I played in high school, I played in college. You couldn't wait to get off the bench and get into the game, whether you started or whether you were, a substitute player. But I remember we were in the middle of a game, and I pointed to one of the players on the bench, and I said, "Go in for so and so." And she shakes her head, in the affirmative. And then I turn back, I'm coaching the game. And out of the corner of my eye, I can see the scorer's table. And she's not at the scorer's table. And so I look back at her and I'm like, "Get in the game for so-and-so." And, she shakes her head in the affirmative again. And then I go back to coaching. And out of the corner of my eye, I can see the scorer's table again. And she's not there. And then I pointed at her again, a little more emphatic, "Get in the game." And now she's shaking me off like a major, baseball pitcher to his catch. "I don't like that sign. No, I'm not going in the game." I'm like, "What? You're not going?" I'm like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me?" So I bring her to me. Now, keep in mind, there's a basketball game going on literally a few feet from us. And I put my hands on her shoulders and I'm like, "I need you in the game. What is wrong?" All of a sudden, the tears start down the cheeks. And she's like, "Coach, I don't want to play." And I said, "I'm sorry, there are no uniform wearers on this team. You come to practice every day and make yourself and your teammates better. You have a responsibility to them. Why don't you want to play?" "Because my friends are in the stands, and if I make a mistake, they will make fun of me." And I said, "Well, what about your responsibility to your teammates? I understand your friends are in the stands, but what about your responsibility for your teams?" And I'm like, "Are we really having a counseling session, on the sideline during a high school basketball game?" And we were. And I finally got her to go into the game. It's like, "I know you're going to make a mistake. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Just give me your best effort. That's okay. That's what I'm looking for." So it was that kind of mentality that I was trying to, I guess, shift. Because these kids, nobody had ever held them accountable. Nobody had ever said, "This is what's required of you if you want to be part of this team." And so it was a learning experience for me coaching girls, but I think it was also a learning experience for them understanding what it took to be part of a team.
Did that prepare you for having a daughter?
It did. I mean, it's funny because, I was a hostage negotiator, when our daughter was young. And, I knew all these techniques on how to communicate with people. And I would go home, and she would be, 2.5, 3 years old. And she'd take a cup of milk and she'd just turn it over and pour it on the floor. And everything I learned as a negotiator went right out the window because now I'm a mad dad. I'm mad that she did this. And it's like, this totally went on. It's like, "Hey, dummy, you know all these things. Why aren't you using them?" Because for the same reason that I told you before, because what am I operating now? I'm operating emotionally. I'm not operating rationally. And when you get in that emotional state, you do dumb things and you say dumb things. And I certainly did that as a dad. So it was kind of funny.
It sounds like you went from a predominantly male environment to now a predominantly female environment. Is that any different, or do you just think they needed more guidance?
It's different. I mean, yeah, I mentioned I had no sisters. I just had brothers. I went to an all boys Catholic high school. I went to an all male military college. So you can imagine, now I've got a daughter and it's my wife and daughter. Now I'm outnumbered. And now I'm a basketball coach, of a girls team that I'm the only guy here. Everybody else is female, even my assistant coaches and that. And I think girls certainly are competitive, don't get me wrong, but girls play sports for a different reason than guys do, I think. Girls want to develop relationships. They like the camaraderie that comes along with being part of a team. Boys could care less about the camaraderie. If I don't like you, I don't care. Can we play basketball? Yeah, let's go play basketball. Girls, it's much more of a relationship-based team aspect than it ever was for boys. And like I said, so I had to learn that. I had to figure that out on how to get them to do what I needed them to do, but do it in a way that, hey, this is good for your teammates, your friends that you're hanging out with and stuff like that. So it was just a different thing that I needed to learn as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is, did that help you learn how to balance your feminine, masculine energy within?
Yeah, I mean, I would be on the bus going to games with them, and guys would be talking about sports and all kinds of. Girls are talking about One Tree Hill, this TV series that they watch. "Coach, you got to watch this," and I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think I'll be watching that. It didn't appeal to me whatsoever, but that's what they're talking about. So I had to take an interest in that. Well, tell me about it. Why is it? I'll never forget. They wanted to put a music recording together, so warm up music, because the boys team had warm up music. And I said, fine. I said, put something together. I said, but I have to listen to it before. I mean, we were a religious school. I have to listen to it before we're allowed to play it. And Natasha, I'm like, I gave it back to him. I'm like, absolutely not. I'm like, you have songs on here that have all kinds of profanity in them and stuff like that. And their response to me was, well, our parents let us listen to this. I said, then go listen to it at home. I can, in all good conscience, as a coach of a religious school, put that up where people are sitting in the stands while you're warming up and listening to, the F word and the B word and things. I'm like, no, we can't do that. And that was a big contention, because they're like, well, we can listen to this stuff at home. I'm like, you can't listen to it at school. I'm sorry, not as part of this team. You understand where I'm coming from? And they couldn't understand that. Well, if I can listen to it at home, why can't this be played over a loudspeaker in a gymnasium with a bunch of other people there? I'm like, really? You can't see this side of it, right? So it took some while. They gave me 2 or 3 iterations of it before I'm like, okay, fine, this will work. But that first one, it was like, absolutely not. We are not.
So how did their performance improve?
It improved a lot, because I expected certain things from them. I was organized. I started things on time. There were rules. There was expectations that they've never had those before. There was I'm like, this is how I used to wear a suit to all the games. And the parents were like, why do you wear a suit? I said, because I want them to understand that this is important. And because it's important, I take it seriously, and I want to look good as their coach, because I'm representing them, and I'm representing myself, and I'm representing the school. So that's why I want them to understand this is important. I'm just not wearing a pair of sweats, to coach in. No, this is important. Everything we did was impressing upon them, you're part of a team. You're not an individual. You have to look out for each other. You have to care for each other. And even the way I picked captains, a lot of times captains on a team were chosen because they were the senior people. They were the seniors, or the older people on the team. I used to have a form that they filled out, and it had 10 questions on it. And I can't remember all of them, but it would be, who is the person you think is the best leader on the team? And then there were 3 slots. Here's the first person, second person, third person. And then, the next question would be, well, who do you think would be able to tell you something difficult without, making it personal? Well, this person. And so I would take all those names, and I would have a pretty good idea who the people on the team, the players on the team, felt were the leaders, felt were the people that they wanted to emulate. And so I would make them captains. And a lot of times it wasn't the senior girls on the team. It might have been a sophomore and a junior. And I left the seniors out because they weren't leaders, or at least they weren't perceived to be leaders by the other members of the team. So everything we did was an expectation of how we can be better, how we can be great. And Natasha, I think that's, as human beings, I think there are so many people that go through life never even contemplating what it means to be great at anything in their life. And I didn't want these girls to ever be in that situation. I want you to contemplate what it means to be great as part of this team. Now, I'm not talking about wins and losses or wins and losses. I'm talking about how you can be great with each other, how you can love each other, how you can look each other in the eye and say, you know what? I gave everything I had on the court today. And I did it for me, but I also did it for you.
Yeah. And I think that's the difference between being a leader versus a manager.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they always say you manage products, you lead people. You don't manage people, you lead people. You manage, processes and ongoing things, reports and things like that. But you lead people. And that's a big distinction. I think a lot, well, I manage these people. No, you don't. You should be leading those people, not managing them.
And I think at the end of the day, whether they succeeded or not, you've impressed upon them more important values in their life than what they learned on the basketball field.
And that's just it. I never talked about wins and losses. I never talked about winning or losing. That was never my focus. And somebody said that, just like, Coach, how come you never talk about winning? I said, because winning's not important. I said, and you have no control over winning. You have control over your effort. You have control over your attitude. You have control over those things. You don't have a control over winning. You have no control over that at all. So why am I going to talk about that if you don't have any control over it? So I want to be able to control the things that you can control and understand that what you're learning today, you're going to be able to use as you go on to college, as you have relationships, with people that maybe you want to marry and things like that, relationships with your parents, relationships in your workplace, all the things I'm teaching you now that I'm trying to teach you, you don't understand it yet, but those are all things that are applicable for the rest of your life. And that's what I cared about. I didn't care about my players winning or losing. What I cared about was them somewhere down the road being good, productive, loving, honest, caring human beings.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm sure they'll remember you for a long time to come.
Or they'll be swearing at me either way. One of the two.
They'll play you music that swears.
That's right.
For good old time's sake.
That's
so
right.
Tell me,
Coach wouldn't let me listen to this.
Yeah. Yeah, Coach. Remember those days. Tell me what happened after that, because you say you had your foot amputated. That I cannot even imagine. I mean, I don't even want to ask you, was it painful or not? Because I think it's way more than that.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm coaching high school basketball and I have a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my third toe. And initially don't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment to see a podiatrist friend of mine, a foot doctor. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I get the call from him, and it's the call that changed my life. And as I mentioned, he was a friend. So the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have an incredibly rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. Mine obviously appeared on the bottom of my feet. And he said, because your cancer is so rare, you need to go to a particular cancer center here in the United States. And I did. And after they cut it out, they looked at me and said, no, you'll probably be dead in 2 years because we have nothing to offer you other than surgery. And I thought, well, you gave me a death sentence. Maybe I can find a way to turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And so, yeah, I mean, I had my foot amputated. I had to learn how to walk again, how to, do all that. And then 2 years later, I had my leg amputated above the knee. So talk about, I spent my entire life being physical. I was a college basketball player. I was a police officer. I was on the SWAT team. And now I don't have a left leg and I'm in a wheelchair. So how do you balance those? And I think when you can't do what you're good at, you do what's important. And I think I've been trying to do what's important for over 12 years now.
Yeah, that's very, very hectic. Sorry to hear that. But is you're battling with it still? Is it something that keep coming up with different melanomas? How do you treat it?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll ever go away. My guess is it won't. I have tumors in my lungs. When I found out my entire lower leg was full of cancer, they also said, hey, by the way, you got tumors in both of your lungs. And, about 6 months after I had my leg amputated, my doctor showed me my CAT scan. And Natasha, I don't know how to read a CAT scan. I mean, I don't have any medical background, but you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, well, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces of my lungs. Without being kind of gross, I was coughing up green, bloody phlegm. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive? And I will never forget this. He put his head down, he shook his head no, and then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been, which said to me that God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about the dying. Spend much more time now focused on the living, the connections that I'm trying to make with other people.
Yeah. So, but you mentioned that your mom and your dad had cancer as well.
My dad did, and my grandmother. My mom is
And your
still alive,
grandmother.
so far doesn't have cancer. So, yeah.
Interesting. Because I find if it's on your left side of your body, it's the female side. It's the feminine side.
Well, it's interesting. I've had all 88 genes that doctors know of or suspect cause every form of cancer that we know of tested. And I have no mutations in any of my genes for any cancer, which kind of begs the question, then why did I get this incredibly rare form of cancer? Now, nobody's ever been able to answer that and probably never will be able to answer that. But, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about why I got it. I just know I got it, and I've got to try to do the best I can to live the best life I can with whatever time I have left.
Well, in one sense, you know that your time is maybe limited, maybe not. I mean, who's to say? But it forces you to be in the moment, to be present, to not sweat the small stuff, as it were, to, not take things for granted. So many people are just living lives behind the TV and waiting for something to happen instead of going out and actually living, because that's what it's about.
It is, and you're absolutely right. And I don't sweat the small stuff. I remember when I found out, I got these tumors in my lungs, I had my leg amputated. I went with my wife to the mortuary and to the cemetery and to the church, and I planned my funeral. And because I do these podcasts and I speak in person about motivation and the need to keep moving forward, I actually got some brushback from people who commented that somehow planning my funeral was in some way defeatist. And I had to remind these people that, the last time I checked, we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is going to truly live. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm trying to look for.
Well, it's amazing because I've often said, why is it that a baby cries when they're born and everyone else does when you die?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're going to a better place. I mean, the world is temporary. It's not what happens, it's what do you make of it? We've all got our cross to bear, I think, in some way or shape or form, because that's what grows you. But what is your need for it? Like, that is my question often. Like, sometimes because I work with mindset a lot as well as you do, which we'll get to, I'm wondering, what is it that we feel the need to carry those things with us for? What is it trying to tell us? I always say there's nothing happens by accident. Your body doesn't lie.
No, and you're right. And I think I've learned a lot through this journey. And two things that I've learned primarily are, number one, I don't think you truly know yourself until you've been tested by some form of adversity in your life, whatever that looks like. And secondly, and this is going to sound kind of weird, cancer has made me a better human being. I mean, people have asked me, if you could go back and live your life without cancer, would you do it? And Natasha, I don't think I would. I mean, I think I would go through all the pain. I think I would go through all the surgeries and the amputations and everything again, because I think I'm better today than I was 12 years ago. And I've always said, I think I've done more living in the 12 years that I've been dying of cancer than I've done in my entire life. And I had a pretty good life before I had cancer. So being able to say that, I am more energized, I am more positive, I am more upbeat, knowing that I'm dying and like I said, I don't think about dying. I don't care about dying. When it happens, it happens. I think, one of the goals in life you should have is to have a good death. And that's hopefully what I'm going to try to do, because I think I had a good life as well.
Absolutely. It's almost a paradox, because most people are either busy living or they're busy dying. You can't be doing one or the other, but for you, it's like both. It's weird. It's really weird. But I mean, we all are in some shape or form, whether it's your cells that are just getting old, or arthritis, or whatever the thing is. It'll force you to look after your body better. So how do you get around? How is it easy for you? I mean, obviously you need to adapt a car or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that easy for people, or is that difficult? Do you have people staring and making comments?
Oh yeah, people make comments all the time, and I feel it's almost my responsibility to diffuse that in some way. And I use humor a lot. I use self-deprecating humor. I always say something about not having a leg or whatever. And I remember one time when I had my foot amputated, I was kind of hobbling out of the hospital. That's really the only word I can use. And there was a woman close to the entrance. And she was staring, you've had those people that they're almost staring like right through you. And I kind of looked around like, is she staring at me? And I was the only person around. So I'm like, well, she must be. So as I walked towards her, when I got right to her, I turned, I looked at her, and I said, don't worry, it'll grow back. And I kept walking. And she got this look on her face like, well, what is this guy, like a salamander or something like that? You cut off its tail, it grows back. What is this guy? And I mean, she had this look on her face, and I was almost laughing. I almost fell over. But I understand that when somebody walks into a room, I mean, I still am. I'm 6'8" tall. When I used to walk into a room, people would look, people would stop and stare because I was so tall. Well, now it's just the opposite. Now I'm in a wheelchair. And I don't have a leg. And when you come into a room, people automatically turn and look, and kind of like, oh, what? So I think it's incumbent upon me to try to put them at ease. And it's like, look, it's okay. I figured it out. But yeah, I rely on my wife a lot my wheelchair isn't really light, and she's got to sling it into the back of the car to take me to my doctor's appointments or my infusion treatments and things like that. So I rely on my wife to take care of me.
It's great that you've got somebody that can be that support for you through all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be in a nursing home if I had to do this by myself. I couldn't do it. Our house is not set up for it. I mean, when I had my leg amputated, it was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. They took my leg off above the knee and sent me home 48 hours later. They told me I'd be in the hospital for 10 days to 2 weeks to learn how to function, to adapt to not having a leg. But because of COVID and everybody was so scared, it was like, no, you got to go home. Our house was not prepared for me to be in a guy with no leg in a wheelchair. I mean, the doors to our bathrooms and our bedrooms are too narrow for my wheelchair. So I have to transition to using a walker to go to the bathroom or to go to bed at night and things like that. So you figure it out, though. You figure out how this is going to work for you. You adapt, and that's what I've done. But you're right. If I didn't have somebody in my life like my wife, or our daughter lives in another part of the country, she's married, and that I know she would take me in and things like that. But yeah, I can't. I'm not self-supporting, self-sufficient.
Yeah. Do you feel like in some way you may be following your father's footsteps?
No. And the reason I say that, my dad had end-stage breast cancer back in the 1980s. And back then, they really didn't know how to treat a man with breast cancer. And so they pretty much told him to go home and die. The thing about my dad was he knew he was sick for months. I mean, he got so weak that my brothers and I, and we're all, 6'8", 6'7", 6'6", 200 and some pounds. We're like, you're going to the doctor. And my dad's like, no, I'm not. And we're like, well, we're bigger and stronger and healthier than you are right now. So yeah, you are. Either you go as a man or we pick you up and carry you to the doctor, but you're going. And that's one of the things. I mean, I love my dad. He was my hero, but sometimes I get frustrated and mad that it's like you knew you were sick. If you would have, we know this with cancer, if you catch it early, you have a much better chance of surviving. But you didn't catch it early, or you did catch it early, but you didn't do anything about it. And I'm like, I was 24 years old when he died. And I was like, I got a lot of questions in life. I got a lot of things that I wish you were around that I could have asked you about. And now you're not here. And you're not here because, I don't know, were you selfish and saying, you know what, this is all about me. I don't care about my family too bad. I'm not going through all this. I'm just going to die. And so I don't look at myself that way as my father was. I'm like, I knew I was sick and I went to the doctor immediately. I didn't wait months and months and months. I'm like, I got to get this taken care of. Yes, it's scary. Hopefully it's nothing. But I don't think it helps any of us, if we know there's something wrong, to just kind of deny it and put it into the back of our minds. Go get it checked out, because you may go through some pain initially, but it sure as heck beats the heck out of what I've been through, having body parts lopped off, having tumors in your lungs and all that kind of stuff. It's not good. Get it checked out. I know you're scared, but don't wait.
Yeah. So what happened to him caused you to have the way you see things now. The way you've handled it would have made you handle it probably better, because you've seen how it directly impacts on people's lives around, because it's not just you, it's everybody else also has it.
You're right. I mean, I deal with the physical pain and the emotional pain. My wife, my daughter, our friends, it's all emotional for them. It's the emotional. They're not feeling, they're not having their leg cut off. They're not doing that kind of stuff. But I think the emotional pain is almost worse than the physical pain. I mean, you can give me something for the physical pain. There's not a lot you can give them other than, hey, it's going to be okay. I mean, you've got to have, for me, you've got to have something bigger than yourself that you rely on. I mean, if this was just me, I would have been dead a long time ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now you've got a company that's called Motivational Check. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, it's really the sort of arm that I use, to write my books, to speak and that kind of thing. I mean, Motivational Check it's a phrase that we were given in the police academy. If we were, and we did some really crazy things. I mean, we ran marathons, we did all kinds of stuff. If you were just having a bad day, it's like, I can't keep doing this. I'm hurting, this is uncomfortable. You could yell out Motivational Check. It was a phrase that was given to us. And the rest of the class would respond with, we were the 84th recruit class, with an 84. In other words, I know you're hurting, but we're in this together. We'll get through this together. This isn't you just being by yourself. We'll get through it together. And I thought, well, what's a good name for my company? I mean, some people were like, oh, the name's too long. It's got to be, it's like, whatever. I don't care if it's too long or not. It is what it is. It means something to me. And so Motivational Check was what I decided to call it when I was looking for a name.
I love that principle, because how nice would it be to be able to just say a word and everybody says, don't worry, I've got your back.
Yeah.
That never happens, like in real life.
No.
If anything, people become defensive and, well, what do you want from me? And, why are we doing this? And on that note, I mean, my company name is also pretty long. And people often say, why such a long name? Because it works for me. Yeah. And people understand what it means. Absolutely. So what do you do in your company?
I speak. I speak. I try to speak in person. I love the interaction with the audience. I love to be able to joke with them, because it's, you get up in front of a business group, that's having their national convention, and, here I am in a wheelchair, with no leg, and people are like, what the heck is, what's this going to be about? I mean, I'm not standing at a podium because I'm not standing, I mean, and things like that. So I use humor, as I mentioned, a lot to try to, kind of calm people down. It's like, this is going to be great. I'm going to tell you some great things that hopefully is going to help you. But I do a lot more virtual now. I mean, just because it's easier. I mean, it's hard to get out. I haven't flown since I had my leg amputated. Everywhere I go, I drive, or my wife drives me and things like that. So I do that. I've written a book. I've written a chapter in another book. I'm working on a second book right now. So it's really the communication piece. How can I take what I've learned through my life, and more specifically through this cancer experience, and make it something where other people could benefit from it? And that's really kind of what this is all about. I don't,
Yeah.
it's relationships. And I know I was listening to some of your podcasts, the near death experiences. I'll end with this story. One of my nurses who still cares for me for the tumors I have in my lungs is a former hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't understand hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life, end of life care. And she gave me a book to read, and it was called Imagine Heaven. And it was about people who had near death experiences. And I learned a lot of things through that book. But one of the primary things that I took away from it was, no matter who the person having the near death experience saw during that experience, whether, God or an angel or a saint or a friend or a relative, whoever it was, almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody got asked one question: how do you treat my people? How do we treat each other? How do we care for each other? How do we help each other? And Natasha, 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember you and I were here. But I hope what I get, or I hope what I can give in whatever time I have left, are those connections, are those deep thoughts, those deep relationships with people. There's a psychology professor at the University of Chicago here who does an experiment with his students and with himself. He will go out and get on a bus, and he wants to be in a deep conversation with somebody with 3 questions. So, hey, you sit down next to them. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm good, thanks. 1 question. Number 2, what do you do for a living? And I'm just making this up. I'm a doctor. Okay. Question 3, have you always wanted to be a doctor? No, I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I lived on a farm growing up. Or, yeah, I always wanted to be a doctor. My dad was a doctor, and I wanted to. And now you're having a deep conversation with people. We don't have deep conversations with each other anymore. We stay on the surface. I want to go deep with people and figure out their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important, because everybody seems to be on this, especially with social media, on the superficial level and see me, but it's just smokescreen and mirrors. And underneath it, there's this emptiness almost. It's like just passing time, trying to look good, trying to do everything, but there's no real meaning. There's no depth of meaning in lives. Yeah. Actually heard somebody was asking, one of the podcasts I watched, what is the difference between an introvert and an extrovert? And an extrovert looks for fun and entertainment, where an introvert looks for meaning. And I think, what was it? Who's happier? Is an extrovert happier than an introvert? And I think ultimately, to me anyway, an introvert would be happier because you have meaning. You're not just looking for the next kick and the next vice and the next, great party to
Right.
pass the day and pass the time.
Well, and you're also, people on social media, will say something to you, and it's like, I don't like the way, you dress today, or I don't like the book bag you have at school, or whatever it is. And I always say to people, why do you care what people who have never even attempted what you have failed at in your life care? Why do you care about those people? It's a rhetorical question. I know why they care, especially when you're young. You want to be part of the group. You want to, you don't want to be ostracized. I get that. But understanding that if you and I were in person, there's a good chance you wouldn't say to me some of the things that you would say to me over social media, that are mean, that are ugly, that are bullying. You wouldn't say that to my face. But social media gives us kind of that smoke screen that we can hide behind to say mean and ugly things to other people. But it only hurts if you take. I mean, my God, when I was a police officer, the names that I was called, people are, oh my gosh, it's like I didn't care. I mean, it only mattered to me if somebody called me a name that I cared about. Some guy was taken to jail that was, F this and F that, all that. Okay, I don't care. But that's just bouncing off. I don't care what you have to say. So,
Well, that also comes with knowing yourself and having self-confidence and self-worth.
It does.
Your value.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about your book because you've written your own book and you've also co-authored a book. The one you've written by yourself, what is that? How would that help people? Because I know you've got sustainable excellence. What is that about?
Yeah, sustainable excellence. Never wanted to write a book, never expected to write a book. There's kind of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never talked to me. God never said, Terry, write a book. But I think what God did, and this has happened other times in my life, where God puts people in my path that start making the same suggestion over and over and over again. And I think when that happens, I'm smart enough to kind of perk up and listen to it and pay attention to it. And so people were saying that. So sustainable excellence was really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached when I was coaching girls high school basketball, who'd moved to the area in the United States with her fiance, where my wife and I live. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Natasha, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason or the reasons you were put on the face of this earth, and they exist. You're just not here in the abstract, using your unique gifts and talents and living those reasons. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man in college reach out to me on social media, and he said, what do you think are the most important things that I need to learn or understand, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we already know. I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time taking some notes, kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the 4 to 5 month period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the 10 principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
Wow. You had your whole book laid out for you right there.
And I didn't even know it. Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. Yeah. So what would you say to people about their lives and their purpose? What message would you have for them?
I would tell you that everybody has a purpose or purposes. A lot of times we talk about purpose in the singular. I think in my life, and I can't speak for anybody else but myself, it's been purposes. When I was younger, I felt my purpose was to be an athlete. As I got into adulthood, I felt my purpose was to follow my grandfather's footsteps and be in law enforcement. And now, in all honesty, as I'm probably coming towards the end of my life, I think my purpose has shifted or changed again to put more goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I can. And it would be great if your purpose could align with your job or your occupation, but it doesn't have to. Your job can be over here. It's what you do to pay the bills, but your purpose is over here to coach, to be a podcaster, to be a painter or writer, whatever it is you feel is in your heart. And so we all have that purpose. Viktor Frankl, you and I were talking about, before we jumped on the call, about how Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor during World War II, talks about how life is not in the abstract. Everybody has a reason, a purpose, that we're here, and we almost have a moral responsibility to find that purpose or purposes and live them. And so many people don't. So many people never think about what it means to be great in our lives. And I heard a saying one time that said the richest real estate in the world are our cemeteries, because they're areas rich in books never written, businesses never started, relationships never pursued. When you go to the cemetery, don't have those regrets. Get out there, do the things you want to do. Life is meant to be lived. You're going to make mistakes. And I'll end with this. I think a lot of times, especially for younger people, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, there are these sort of arbitrary mileposts where, okay, by the time I'm 28 years old, I want to be making $100,000 a year. Or by the time I'm 32 years old, I want to be married and have a child. And when those things don't happen, somehow you get down, you get depressed, you think there's something wrong with you. I think looking at our lives not by individual events, but in decades. I think in your 20s, you should do everything. You should get out there, try new things, make mistakes, screw up, just do everything. And then in your 30s, based on doing that in your 20s, you'll find 2 or 3 things that are just really important to you that you really want to be part of. And then in your 40s, when you're older, when you have more experience, when you're more mature, when your prefrontal cortex has finally wired itself and things like that, you'll have that one thing that you really want to go deep on. And then in your 50s and your 60s, you can reap the rewards, you can reap the benefits of what you did in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I think if you look at life that way, you're not so much geared toward there are these things that have got to happen. You're in your 20s. I'm 28 years old. I'm not making, that's okay. You still have more time. You look at life in decades and don't try to have these arbitrary milestones that you're trying to adhere to.
Yeah, and I also think people are stuck in how old they are.
Yeah.
It's not a gauge as to whether you're going anywhere or been anywhere. Some people die young. Some people live to be 120. Doesn't matter, because what good is it if you've lived to 120 but you haven't lived life or done much with your life? And maybe that is your life path, to just live long.
I mean, it might be. There's an entrepreneur here by the name of Ed Milet, and he talks about the 4 types of people in the world. He said the first group are the unmotivated. And he said that's the vast majority of people you will run into in your life. The second group he talks about are the motivated. He says it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. It's kind of low level, but it works for a lot of people to have a very happy and successful life. The third group he talks about are the inspirational people, where the word inspiration comes from 2 words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you move people with your energy. And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And it's kind of funny, if depending on the group that I'm talking to, occasionally I'll tell that story and be like, all right, show of hands, how many people are unmotivated? Nobody raises their hand. Nobody ever says I'm unmotivated. But if you believe Milet, the vast majority of people are unmotivated. So it's always kind of fun, to do that and just have a little play on it. Can you be an inspirational or an aspirational person with your life? I think we all can. It's just a matter of whether we want to and want to put in the time and the work to get there.
Yeah. So what do you think is holding people back? Do you just think it's a lack of consciousness or conscious awareness? Or because some people have had trauma, some haven't had as much trauma. I mean, it doesn't matter what their background is. It's irrelevant.
Right. I think the biggest thing that holds people back is fear. They're afraid of what will happen. And I know I've done this. I mean, one of the chapters, I even wrote about it in the book. One of the chapters I titled, Most People Think with Their Fears and Their Insecurities instead of using their minds. Natasha, I know I've done that in my life. I know I've wanted to start something or start a business or something, and you kind of pull back. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough information, or what will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And whenever I get the opportunity to talk to young people, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
Yeah. So the fear is more of what other people are going to think or say, rather than just some external factor. Maybe it's not fear of failure, it's fear of looking like a failure in other people's eyes.
Yeah, or just, I don't have enough. I haven't figured it out yet. I don't know what's going on. There's a woman by the name of Sarah Blakely, very rich entrepreneur, started a women's undergarment company called Spanx. And her husband tells the story. He said when she started that company, she had 1 prototype and $5,000. And she had been a door-to-door fax salesperson. Now, we don't even use faxes anymore. And the point he was trying to make was if she would have waited until she understood, the marketing, the distribution, the human resources, the legal, if she would have waited till all that stuff was in place, he said, I guarantee somebody else would have come up with that idea and run with it. The point he was trying to make is wherever you are, just start. Just jump in and figure it out as you go along. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. As long as you learn from those mistakes, you can still push forward. You can still move forward. But I think that's where, it's like, I don't have everything in place, so I'm kind of afraid to do this. Just do it. Just do it. What's the worst can happen? It doesn't work out. But did you learn something from that? I love the quote from Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, who said, I never lose. I either learn or I win. Just jump in and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. So where can people get hold of you?
So I have a blog/website called Motivational Check, as as you mentioned, and you can go there and leave me a message. It's motivationalcheck.com.
Awesome. And your book, is it on Amazon as well, or is it on
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple iBooks, wherever you can get a book online. You can also get it through my website if you go to Motivational Check.
Yeah, great. I'll post all those details in the description below as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Your energy is very contagious and inspiring.
Appreciate
So
that.
keep it up. We need more leaders in the world. So well done. Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I think you've got a lot to offer because you've not only you've been on so many sides of the fence. Like I see so many not contradictions, but contrasts. It's the male, female, the tall, the low, trying all these different things. It's just, yeah. And I think, again, that's about experience. It comes back to experience again.
It does. Yeah. And learning and figuring it out as you go. And so I'm very happy at that. And thank you for saying that. Nice to meet you as well. You take care.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.